Trash for the trash start, glue for the glue throw. Welcome to PVA Blood, and I am going to walk you through the process of turning some trash into a battle-scarred fortification.
I'm going to demonstrate 4 different methods to help your next terrain project stand out. These are all dirt cheap, beginner friendly, and can be achieved even if, like me, you don't have the steadiest hands. For this video, I hit the ground running. No real plan, just improvising with whatever materials I had on hand. In future, I'll expand on these methods and cover the design process. I'm going to make a ruined pumping station that's been damaged and fortified during a particularly vicious conflict. I grabbed some old MDF to use as a base for the terrain. MDF stands up really well to regular use, and so will survive storage and gameplay. I cut some EVA foam to fit on it using an old bread knife. This EVA is textured on one side, which works really well when making an industrial surface. When it comes to EVA foam, I prefer to use black, mainly because if a piece is ever damaged, EVA foam that's black stands out a lot less. However, for this build, I just used whatever I had lying around. The foam pieces are held in place using PVA glue, and extra stability is provided by poking in some toothpicks. Digging through the recycling, I found an old hose nozzle which I thought had some interesting shapes to it that I might want to use in a future project. I've decided that I'm going to use it as part of some industrial ruin on this terrain piece. Maybe it's an old communication tower or like a Tesla coil or something. I don't know, I just thought it looked cool. I'm also going to be making use of a part of an old dog toy that I had lying around. It's going to make some nice industrial piping. For a lot of my projects, you'll see that I make use of filler putty. This stuff is excellent for general house repair, but also when it dries, it'll make a really convincing concrete pattern. You can apply it using any old scraper, you don't have to be too accurate, and you only need to give it a couple of hours to dry. I decided to glue the hose and piping to my project using expanding Gorilla Glue. Now, I wouldn't recommend to use this with miniatures, but for this terrain project, it's great, because when it expands, it's going to make it look really sludgy. Now the filler putty is dry, you're going to need to sand it flat to make a convincing concrete finish. So to do this, I've just stapled a piece of sandpaper to a piece of scrap timber, and I'm just going to rub down all of those walls to make them nice and smooth. You don't have to be too accurate, as we are going to be scuffing them up again later with battle damage. Toothpicks again. Snap them in half, jab them into the edge of a wall, and all of a sudden it looks like part of the wall is crumbled away because you've got some exposed rebar. Now, using something pointy like a toothpick or a knife, jab out a series of holes on the putty surface. These are going to be bullet holes. Make some of them larger than others to show higher caliber rounds impacting into the terrain, or perhaps the damage from exotic weaponry. Now, I was thinking the piece needed some more detail, so I decided to make some corrugated iron that would have the look of being used as a barricade. I got a piece of corrugated cardboard, peeled off one side, and then just tidied it up as best I could. I wasn't too worried about getting all the little bits of paper off, as anything stuck on there would just look like rust and decay. I then propped this in place using some small wooden sticks. You're going to need some sand for the next part, so go scoop some dirt through a colander, and don't chuck out any of the larger bits that get left behind, because you will want to use them later to add some extra detail to the texture. Now, everywhere you think it's going to be logical for there to be lots of dirt or mud, hit that area with some PVA glue, and then you're going to want to sprinkle the sand over that area. Shake the excess off. It's a good idea to try and do this back into the dirt container, but you do you. Now we're going to make some convincing, yet cheap, sandbags using air drying clay. We want to roll out some sausages out of the clay that are about half a centimeter thick, and then press down on them until they're about 1 centimeter thick. Then get a blade and run it along each edge of the sausage to create the seam. At about 1 centimeter or 1.5 centimeter increments, you want to cut them with that same blade to make your individual sandbags. For each layer of sandbag I would put on, I would also put a layer of glue on beforehand. This will just help secure them as they're dry, but when they're fully dry, it's going to be a rock solid bond. Remember that this stuff is super cheap. There is absolutely nothing stopping you from making a full-on trench network. Once I'd given the sandbags about an hour to dry, I covered the entire model with some watered down PVA glue. This is just a final protective layer before we start applying paint. Priming is important as it will help your paint actually stick to your piece. I did use spray paint for this step, but you can use acrylic if you'd like. When painting terrain, I generally use acrylic paints. At the very minimum, you're going to need 3 colours, a grey, a brown and a white, but as you can see here, I did use some extras just for additional variation, as well as a couple of metallics that I'm just going to use sparingly on the industrial parts. This is a pretty simple paint job. You're going to want to paint concrete grey, dirt brown, and I touched up the machinery using a silver. If you're going to be playing games on your terrain piece, it's a good idea to mix some PVA glue into the paint itself, as this is just going to help the bonds and add yet more protection. Now onto the sandbags. I didn't want to lose the detail that I'd carved into the bags, so when I made my off-white colour by combining some white and brown, I did add a small amount of water just to thin it slightly. Take your time and apply 2 thin coats. Once everything's dry, we're going to dry brush the entire model to help highlight the details. You want to put some paint onto a brush and then wipe most of it off until the brush is almost dry. You can see here that the paint will only catch onto the raised edges and make all those details that you've carved into the terrain piece really pop. Once the paint is dry, you can apply some washes. You can make your own wash by mixing about 9 parts water to 1 parts paint. Washes will flow to the recessed areas of a model and will help convey the idea of shadow and the mud and grime that you might expect forming on a terrain feature like this. If you find the wash is pooling in areas, just use a paper towel or a tissue to wipe up the excess. You can see that after using only a single colour of wash, that the terrain is already a lot more convincing. I wanted to make the battle damage look a lot more serious as well as aged, so I added some darker wash into the bullet holes as well as some areas of shadow. Now here's a technique that I think looks so good, it's almost cheating. We're going to be making some spent bullet casings. Get yourself some angel hair pasta and some paint. I used Retributor armor from Citadel, but you can use any metallic paint for this effect. Just apply paint to pasta and then cut it to size. Don't worry about trying to get all the little pieces the same size. It's unlikely that orc sluggers, bolt guns, auto guns, needle pistols, stubbers would be using the same size ammunition, so your shells don't have to be the same size either. When deciding where to place the spent ammunition, I had to think about where it was likely that soldiers would have been standing and firing their weapons, and where those shells would have been kicked during the heat of battle. It's at these locations that you want to put down some PVA glue and then sprinkle the casings. This isn't an exact science. These things weigh nothing and they bounce pretty high, so they are going to go everywhere. Because the shell casings are so small, you'll want to use a tool to help put them in place, like a paintbrush or the edge of a knife. Once all the casings are where you want them to be, paint them again with another layer of PVA. This extra layer is going to help protect them from being damaged during gameplay. When PVA dries, it has a gloss finish, and so to counteract this, I applied a final layer of wash. And that's it! You've got some cool looking terrain for your forces to do battle over. Hopefully this video has inspired you to have a go at making your own terrain. If you'd like to see more or have any suggestions for the future, please leave a comment and subscribe to see some of my future builds. I'll not be doing that eccentric opening again. I was watching the Astartes videos whilst editing this and got carried away. So yeah, thanks for watching.